that.
Of course I remember. I wrote every word.
Well, that's something that sets you apart from most of the people in Washington then.
Wrote every word and decided what ended up going in the final copy and what did not, along with my editors. And I was fairly insistent that stay.
You know,
tell the viewers what was in there.
I can't do that. I can't read my own. It's like
I can paraphrase. I mean, I complimented you for saying at the end of a random conversation at one of these DC events, I think it was an Axios event,
yes,
where I was just trying to be nice. Your wife had actually invited George and me to your home for a barbecue. I still have the email, and it never happened. But anyway, I had said, look, when George and I first started dating and then we're engaged, we did the commuting thing between DC, where I was, and New York, where he was. And, you know, it works out. And then you stopped me and you said, The View is the worst show on television. It's kind of funny. That
Still
was very
true.
Clarifying. That was kind of clarifying.
Even more true.
No, and it was
a horrible depiction of American femininity.
Well, you're, someone close to you lasted quite a few years there.
Yes, she did. And I think it takes a lot out of you. I think it's telling that so many people who emerge from that experience seem almost permanently damaged by it. And the level of animosity, I think, from the industry toward any conservative woman, but particularly any pro-life conservative woman in media is, unfortunately, I think, just incredible. There really are, if you look at it, outside of Fox Network and other conservative networks, on the broadcast networks, NBC, ABC, CBS, there are no pro-life women who are there. And while you may have some conservative women here and there at networks, there just is nobody who consistently has an opposing view on the abortion issue. I know that that's an issue that you care about. I know that it's something that is important to a lot of women. Why do you think it is that the media wants to pretend that pro-life conservative women don't exist?
They don't know any in their personal lives. And I think if I write in my book also that we never deeply examine that which we deeply disdain, which is why so many people to this moment, Ben, still do not appreciate, understand, acknowledge, or respect the 74 million Trump Pence voters, for example. They want them all to have been in the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021. Yes. They want them all to be running from the hills, toothless, barefoot.
Bison hat in hand.
Absolutely. And that's why so many of the quote pollsters, media pollsters, get everything so wrong. And I see them playing a little cover your butts this time around because they were wrong in 2016. They were wrong in 2018. We actually picked up seats in the Senate because they misread the Kavanaugh moment. Yeah. And they were certainly wrong in 2020. Even with a different presidential outcome, they were still underestimating, undervaluing, and undercounting the strength of the Trump voter. But let me back up a second. When it comes to abortion, I do think that is an area where there's always been a very strong bias in the mainstream media. There's no question about that. It's almost their litmus test. I'm most concerned, I'm a little less concerned that the media refuse to engage or acknowledge or hire pro-life women than I am that you have an entire political party in this country, the one that has full control of Washington, D.C. right now, in fact, an entire Democratic Party that has no pro-life women in it. Right. So I don't know how many Democratic female senators are. Let's say 18, 20. I don't know how many there are. It doesn't matter to me, and here's why. If you had 100 of the 100 United States senators be pro-abortion, pro-choice women, be women, would it matter? Because they all have one point of view on everything. Mm-hmm. They're all gun grabbers. They're all for higher taxes. They all voted for the Inflation Reduction Act, and they're all for abortion. Mm-hmm. And so if you have every woman in a political party, beginning with this disaster of a vice president, Kamala Harris, with one point of view on one of the most fraught issues in our culture that brings together science, medicine, religion, morality, gender, politics, law, and everything else, they only have one point of view. They're not representing the rest of America. And they are the extremists. I think what Donald Trump, candidate Trump, did to Hillary Clinton in that final debate, August 19, 2016, was transformative. Just turning to her and saying, you're the extremist in abortion. You would rip that baby out of its mother's womb an hour before it's born. Really changed the conversation, allows people to say to pro-choice folks all the time now, well, what are your exceptions? Have you ever met an abortion you think is a bad idea?
If you look at the way that the media tried to spin the post-Dobbs political environment, they spent basically a month and a half, 2 months, trying to claim that, the headline in Politico was Dobbs regret. The idea that Republicans were sad that Roe, had gone away, and that they were going to, lose seats over it. First off, I think most pro-life Americans would gladly accept that result as a trade-off if necessary. But then you have this dynamic, as the Wall Street Journal was reporting just the other day, that we see all these suburban women coming back toward the Republican Party. In the post sort of midterm narrative, how do you think the media, how do you think the pollsters are going to square this assumption that these same women for whom you said abortion was going to be a determinative thing that turned things around for the Democrats, it really looks like it's going to be the opposite, that all these suburban women voters who you thought were going to go in one direction are going to go in the opposite direction.
And that's what happens when you narrowcast to any one group based on their gender or their race or their age or other immutable characteristics, Ben. And that's what the Democrats did here. They narrowcasted to women on abortion. They really talked to women from the waist down only. Whereas I think the Republican Party speaks to women from the waist up. After all, that's where our eyes, ears, brain, mouths, and hearts are. So waist up is much better. Also, women are not single issue thinkers. We're not single issue voters. We are multi-thinkers, multitaskers. You know this. And so why in the world would we go to the ballot box and only be thinking of any one thing? I think the Democrats have made a similar miscalculation among Hispanics, thinking they only care about immigration. Turns out many of them do care about immigration and border security, but they support, they want it. And that's exactly right. They want legal immigration. They want border security. They're very concerned about a rise in crime, a rise in fentanyl taking over the country, et cetera. And they want us to be a sovereign nation with enforceable physical borders. The other thing is, this is the first post-Roe, post-pandemic, post-January 6th election, the Democrats thought it would all go their way, and their friends in the media thought it would all go their way. None of those issues are really going to go their way in the end. January 6th, a terrible day in American history. I've always been consistent on that. Wrote a long statement on January 7th. I'll never change my mind. But I feel about January 6th the way I feel about Paul Pelosi's attacker, the way I feel about the rapist, and the way I feel about everyone. If you've committed a crime, you ought to be arrested, indicted, or put up for indictment, tried, have our rule of law, our justice system do its work, and punished, no matter who you are and how the crime was committed. So that's one thing. But this idea that Americans were going to put aside all the top issues, Ben, inflation, economy, crime, education, immigration, and border security, and just talk about January 6, 2021 was always foolish.
Yes. I know that you have been paying attention to polling and to attitudes during multiple Republican waves that transformed Washington. The Newt Gingrich 1994 wave, the 2010 Tea Party wave. But looking back at those waves, as much as they did enact change, you saw policies shift because of them. You saw a lot of, a blockade against, particularly President Obama's agenda. There's also this feeling of dissatisfaction. And that essentially conservative voters, people who demanded change from Washington, didn't get enough out of these waves. They didn't get everything that they really asked for. And so you have this frustration that, we go out there and we see a wave election, but we don't see the things that we want changed. How can the Republican leadership, as you see it, the new Republican leadership in the House that's likely to form, how can they avoid the mistakes of the 94 and the 2010 wave when it comes to advocating for dramatic change in Washington?
It's an excellent question. And first of all, the gains this time can never be as big as those gains because we don't have enough available seats.
Yeah.
Both parties have made sure that through redistricting, we don't have as many available seats that are truly swing seats, Ben. Plus, the Republicans banked 14 or 15 seats in 2020 already. So, but to your very important question about how to take a political wave election and make sure the policy gains are there that we can see. I think McCarthy, as Speaker, he's very close to Newt. He'll learn some of those lessons. And Newt Gingrich, as the new Speaker, did put things up for a vote that they had promised to do. But there was a lot of resistance, a lot of internecine warfare, a lot of distraction about Bill Clinton. I think you ignore Joe Biden or you put things on his desk and make him explain to the American people why he's for more spending, more trillions of dollars spending of money we don't have on things we didn't ask for or quite need, why he is for energy dependence, why he is for an insecure, porous border over which millions of people have walked since Joe Biden has been there. Let Joe Biden explain. Let the Republicans do their work. The worst thing Republicans can do when they take power in 2 short months, Ben, is number one, have all this internecine war, infighting about committee assignments, about chairmanships, about what's most important on the agenda so that things don't get done. And number two, to say what no voter wants to hear them say, which is, oh, we can't do that. Joe Biden will never sign into law. We need a Republican president. Forget all that. Because it didn't work on repealing and replacing Obamacare, did it? Mm-hmm. We had a 2018, I was there. We had in 2017 and 18, we had a Republican House and Senate. President Trump came in and said, well, this will be easy, repealing and replacing Obamacare. After all, these House members have voted for it dozens of times. They're just waiting for a president not named Obama to repeal and replace Obamacare. Didn't happen. So if you made a promise to your constituents of what you would do and you've won your primary, let alone your general, doing that, promising that, you need to make good on that. So they need to be bold. And I think Kevin will. I think McCarthy will. Sure, investigate things like Hunter Biden, the beginnings of COVID, where we overreacted, where we underreacted, investigate Afghanistan. Don't go for impeaching Joe Biden. Let him twist in the wind. Let the Democrats own and eat him and the vice president he chose.
Do you think they should impeach Mayorkas?
I think they should ask him questions under oath and not allow him to lie anymore. Here's a guy who's lied so many times. The border's secure. The border agents risking their lives and their safety every single day, Ben, were whipping migrants. No, they weren't. So he needs to apologize. He needs to be held to account. And I think the country will welcome that.
Do you think that Mitch McConnell will go along with a more aggressive approach, the kind that, really puts the Biden administration on the spot, given that he always seems to return to the comfort of quote unquote normalcy as he defines it?
Well, he should do that, and he may do that, very well may do that, because he's going to be majority leader again, it would seem. But he's used to dealing with majorities, being in the minority or the majority, where the numbers are so slim. But we've just lived through Kamala Harris doing absolutely nothing except breaking ties in the Senate. She now holds the record. She's beaten John Adams, and Mike Pence had many too, but beaten the record for the most tie-breaking votes. So people will reflect on that. I think Mitch McConnell knows that better than anyone, Ben, that we cannot have. They took their slim majority of a 51st vote from a very unpopular, unwelcome in the campaign trail, Kamala Harris as vice president, and pushed forward all this nonsense like Inflation Reduction Act. Every Democrat voted for it. Every Republican voted against it. She's a tie-breaking vote. So I think if I'm Leader McConnell, I look at that and I say, we're going to do exactly the same thing and get our agenda moving.
I found this speech the other day, and I want you to react to this quote. The great strength of the Democratic Party in my lifetime has been that it has always produced young, nasty people who had no respect for their elders. And I think that one of the great problems we have in the Republican Party is that we don't encourage you to be nasty. We encourage you to be neat, obedient, and loyal and faithful, and all those Boy Scout words, which would be great around the campfire, but are lousy in politics. That's Newt in 1978.
Yeah, Newt, one of my mentors and heroes, Newt Gingrich, will tell you that that's the year he finally won. He lost in 74, he lost in 76, he won in 78, but it took until 1994 to have the Republicans take over the House and Senate, lots of governorships and state legislatures too. It took many years, it took 20 years since he first started to complete that Reagan revolution. But I hear what he's saying, and I think you're going to see that in the Democratic Party more than anything. Mm-hmm. I think when Republicans take control, and if Donald Trump announces he's running for president again, it doesn't scramble the Republican field, it scrambles the Democratic field. Then the George Wills of the world, then the smart, frustrated few like a Mark Penn or a Jessica Tarlov or Maria Salazar today, saying what I think she was attacking her own party, the Democratic Party. Then they step up and they say, listen, we have to do something.
You saw the Hillary Rosen comments.
Hillary Rosen, another friend of mine, very smart Democratic strategist who's seen a lot in her.
But are they going to listen to that when the whole attitude of this next generation seems to be this sort of, whether it's AOC or AOC adjacent, this kind of millennial girl boss, we know best type progressive wokeness, as opposed to, a more class focused thing, the kind of stuff that Bachyan or Sargon writes about quite a lot, that basically says, of course defund the police makes no sense. Of course, you need to be appealing based on these class motivations and not on this race-based woke agenda.
Not sure that they're capable of doing that, because in addition to AOC and the squad that doesn't do squat, you've got Pete Buttigieg, went pretty far in the presidential election in 2020, speaks 8 languages, but it turns out none that make any sense to Americans right now. As Secretary of Transportation, when he talks about everybody getting in electric cars, and pretends the infrastructure bill made any sense, or pretends that your canceled or delayed air travel isn't really your canceled or delayed air travel. I think he ruined himself in part by going into this sad and pathetic administration. So I'm not sure he can do it. He's a corporate guy anyway. He's a McKinsey guy, so the donors will always love him. I'm not sure he can do it. Hakeem Jeffries is circling around to take over some leadership positions, it seems, kick out Steny Hoyer and Nancy Pelosi. But there too, I'm not sure he's able to, that he's willing to really have the message that would have been Tim Ryan had he not run for Senate. It was Tim Ryan in 2016. So Donald Trump wins, and he wins in large part appealing to workers and appealing to manufacturing and coal and energy and the like, has a real workers, forgotten man, forgotten woman agenda. And Tim Ryan does the very bold thing then of running against Nancy Pelosi for a leadership position, and then sort of goes right back to voting with Biden 100% of the time. On the stump this time, on the stump, he's embracing Trump with these trade ads. Trump's so wonderful in trade, et cetera. Votes with Biden 100% of the time. So if you can find that messenger, I suppose so. But this Democratic Party has bled workers as voters, and now is bleeding Hispanics and suburban women, et cetera. So they're really losing their philosophical moorings and the guts of their party. The Democratic Party I grew up in South Jersey. I grew up very modestly, where all the men in my family and our extended family, they were all in the private trades. They were carpenters and welders and pipe fitters and iron workers and hairdressers. And so they just, that part of the Democratic Party seems to be gone. I think even this past weekend proved again, it's just a lot of liberals, mainly white, rich liberals, but a lot of rich liberals. I'll put Barack Obama in there. A lot of rich liberals, just scolding everybody, telling the rest of us how to feel and what to drive, what to wear, what to eat, and how to vote.
Democracy's at stake. It doesn't matter that the cost of diapers is up 180%.
And the baby formula. Dad of almost two daughters knows this.
Yeah, exactly. The conversation about where Democrats go from here is interesting, and you teased it in the sense of we assume that I'm assuming that you are also of the opinion that once Donald Trump announces that in the wake of this election that you will have a lot of reaction that follows on to that perspective of, do we really want to run Joe against him again, just given how terribly these things are going? Do they really have someone to turn to that's realistic?
The Democrats, they can't do what a president who's failing and flailing as badly as Biden is would normally do, especially if they have the first female vice president, first female of color vice president, just turn to her. Yeah. Imagine this, Ben. Imagine being Joe Biden and your disapproval rating has been over 50% for a year. You've left nobody happy on any major issue at all. And imagine, though, that they are able to come to you and say, Joe, you ran for president for 40 years. You finally got the brass ring. Mm-hmm. You've been in the Oval. You invested in climate in the future. You've done all these great things. He's done absolutely nothing great. Yeah. Done all these great things. And we're going to do you one more. You're going to make history one more time, not just by being the oldest president, but by being the one who elevated the first female vice president of color in our nation's history. Step aside and let her take the reins. Nobody will be able to say that to him, Ben, because she is a disaster in equal measures to his disaster. She's lost 18 senior staffers. And when people say, oh, her approval ratings, her approval ratings are low because of racism and sexism. It's called eyesight and hearing. Yeah. We're watching and listening. And so they can't even do that. They can't turn to her. Imagine that. So I don't know who they've got. Their bench is their problem, not mine or yours. However, your point is the right one, which is I don't believe that Trump announcing scrambles the Republican field. I think it scrambles the Democratic field. And as much as they say we'd love a cage match, rematch with Donald Trump, we beat him once, we'll beat him again. There's no way they really feel that way. Even Ron Klain, who on most days is a tweeter and not a leader, has to look at that and say, there's no way in hell.
It is funny.
That if it's a binary choice.
It is funny to track his tendencies just based on it's very.
And who they invite for Rose Garden ceremonies and whatnot.
James
based on
Taylor.
It's also silly. Well, a lot of these people too, who I think have been pushed up by bots and not much else. The point is that even he would need to say, hold on. Can we beat Donald Trump if we strip everything else away? And everything else won't be stripped away. Trump will be talking about other things and so will the Democrats. But if you stripped everything away and it's a true binary choice between Trump's economy and Biden's economy, Trump's energy policy, Biden's energy policy. Where is Putin when Trump's president? Where is he when Biden's president? Is the border secure? Is crime rising? Is fentanyl the number one killer of 18 to 44-year-olds? On which president's watch did that happen and not happen? That is why I think so many of these voter groups are realigning with the Republicans this time when Trump's not on the ballot, but Biden is.
Mm-hmm. Clearly, there is some tension there with the one person who prognosticators think could give the former president trouble in terms of the nomination battle, and that's Ron DeSantis. Do you think that an early announcement runs any risk, just without any sort of devotion to the former president as someone who you worked for, helped elect, et cetera? Just from the analyst side of things, does he run the risk of creating a scenario where he has to sustain momentum for so long by announcing so early that it increases the likelihood of someone like DeSantis jumping in and running against him?
So a couple things. President Trump announcing a run soon would dissuade many people who thought of running from running.
Tom Cotton, for instance, just announcing
took himself
the other day, taking himself out.
He's a young man, as is Ron DeSantis, and they can run in the future. So a few things. I think what happens if it's Joe Biden and Donald Trump, there are other candidates who will run, who will tease a run, but they're more, I wouldn't even call them independents. I think some of them are never Trumpers. I think some of them are worried that Donald Trump could beat Joe Biden, so they're going to try to get in there the way Ross Perot did. Mm-hmm. After Pat Buchanan bloodied up George Herbert Walker Bush in 1992 in those primaries, he couldn't beat him for the nomination, but he bloodied him up enough that here comes Ross Perot, gets 19% of the popular vote, Ben, 30% in Maine, his best state, 9% in Mississippi, his worst state, but doesn't win electoral votes, but ushers in the Bill Clinton presidency because he played spoiler. So I think there will be plenty of people who can see Biden and Trump getting well under 50% of the vote and being a spoiler. And you may have even more than one person do that. Maybe Liz Cheney will run. She can't win, but she can make it miserable for a while for different people. But in the case of DeSantis, I can go either way with Governor DeSantis, who I do know and who I respect enormously. I think he's been an unbelievably successful governor of our third largest state. And I think there's an argument for him staying in that job. Be the most unbelievable two-term governor our third largest state, Florida, has ever seen. Ron DeSantis can take credit for the economy there, for the investments in workforce development, for education, for his COVID response, for picking the right side of culture wars. The list goes on. And all the new, I think we're in the six figures, new Republican registered voters in Florida. Florida is no longer a purple state. It certainly isn't a blue state. It's ruby red. And I think if he does that, then he walks into the presidency practically in 2028, mainly because most of his generational peers who would be running then are in the United States Senate. These are great guys. I love them. Rand Paul, Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, Josh Hawley, Tom Cotton. They're great guys. But guess what? They work in the United States Senate. They're not the governor of the third largest state doing all these great things. Now, on the flip side, I know people around Ron DeSantis who tell him Chris Christie lost his moment in 2011, 2012. Nobody knows what it'll be like a few years from now. I think the parallels are fine, but not completely apt. But there too, I mean, Ron DeSantis has to turn around and say to Florida, "Thanks for reelecting me. By the way, I'm going to Iowa and New Hampshire now." So he's got to think about that too. So there's much to consider, but I think you're making the point that the bench on the Republican side is full and it's deep. And whether you're Donald Trump or Mike Pence or Ron DeSantis or someone in the future, you, like most of the 2022 candidates, are running on the America First policy agenda. You just are. You have to go back and look at the Trump-Pence accomplishments for your roadmap, for your blueprint of how you would promise and how you would govern as a Republican, as a center-right conservative president.
There's been an overwhelming dominance on the part of baby boomers in our politics for a long time. Joe Biden is obviously even older. He's silent generation. As you know, there are now more millennials than there are baby boomers. At what point?
Don't forget Gen Xers.
Well, no, but see,
generation.
This is actually what I was going to ask.
1965 to
Are we just going to skip? Are we just going to skip over Gen X in terms of political leadership?
Well, I don't know.
Are you going to? Is there never going to be a Gen X president?
Well, we've got a bunch of Gen Xers who are governors,
yeah,
and
but
senators,
like Tim Ryan and Beto and Stacey Abrams, all those people are about to get swept off the map.
They are. But those three deserve to be.
Yes.
They've run. I mean, Tim Ryan actually has run a pretty good campaign. It's just filled with lies about who he is and what he would do as senator.
Besides that,
Beto, of course, I wonder with Beto O'Rourke if he's just happy for his wife to be home raising those three kids, because boy, has he run for a lot of offices unsuccessfully while she's been there with the kids. And Stacey Abrams went Hollywood, putting herself on covers of magazines and making millions of dollars, and so people don't always like
President
that.
of the Federation.
I don't know. I wouldn't give up on a Gen X president. Maybe the Gen X president could go after the millennials. You never know.
But see, isn't it the most Gen X thing to think about running for president and then not do it?
It's the most Gen X thing to be skipped over. I can tell you that. 1965, we're so small, and I always call us the generation formerly known as X. Stop giving us like this unknown variable X. But I think we've done great things. So, yeah.
I worry about shifting to a millennial politics in America for a couple of reasons. But obviously the most dominant aspect of it from my perspective is that going out there and doing work does not actually seem to be something that they are designed to do. Everything is so performative, driven by social media. It's kind of spastic and chases after different rabbits. And you can see that not just in the realm of politics, but right now we see the kind of layoffs that are happening to the tech industry, under the leadership of people like Mark Zuckerberg, who, are supposed to be, brilliant millennials, but are also, constantly taking their eye off the ball or chasing some shiny object. What does it mean to be moving to a millennial stage of leadership for the Democratic Party? And what do you think it's going to do to the nature of their dynamic? If given that the Republicans are about to have all these new people, as you mentioned, coming into their coalition, is this millennial generation of leadership just going to double down on wealthy households, racial resentment, climate and alphabet soup gender issues and that kind of thing?
So I don't like to overgeneralize based on a generation, but I will say this: the way the Democratic Party seems to be approaching the future as millennials, and maybe millennial dominated, as you say, Ben, I'm going to say yes. I'm going to say they're going to stick with what they know, not with what they should do. One thing that I don't predict will happen after this election is any kind of course correction and self-examination. I think the Democratic Party is going through a real identity crisis that began with Donald Trump's election over Hillary Clinton, but has continued really all the way into having over 20 Democrats run for president in 2020 and standing up and looking you in the eyes with a straight face and saying, we are the party of youth and energy, and we have a Black woman, an African-American man running. We have Hispanic. We have the first openly gay man running. We have an American Samoan. By the way, it was Tulsi Gabbard, not Elizabeth Warren, in case we're confused. Speaking of Elizabeth Warren, we have a socialist woman, a socialist man. They had one of everything running. They like to brag. And they ended up with the old white guy who had been in Washington, D.C. for 5 decades. So they've just got this sustained identity crisis that will probably deepen and worsen with millennials taking over the Democratic Party. Which Democrats, I'd like to know, of any generation, Ben, are going to stand up and say, excuse me, we just got our asses kicked again. We need to learn from this. What are we learning? If Lee Zeldin comes up short, and God, I hope he wins and he's the next governor of New York, if he comes up even just a little bit short, is Kathy Hochul going to take a look in the mirror and saying, I just had a political near-death experience. I'm going to learn from this. Crime is a big issue. First thing I'll do as governor is she? I think they never really learn their lessons at all.
We already hear that siren song from Stacey Abrams and from Keisha Bottoms that, it's all just misinformation online.
The voter is so dumb, and we're just trying to manipulate them. Absolutely.
So let's go out on this. What makes you hopeful about the future of American politics, and what concerns you the most about the next period in terms of, Republicans taking over, presumably the House and the Senate, winning a lot of races, increasingly playing in new territory when it comes to their coalition? What gives you hope and what gives you concern?
I'm always hopeful about America. It is such a strong, sturdy nation filled with beautiful, amazing people. And the story of this nation is resilience and second chances. And if you had a job like mine as senior counselor to the president, and all you do all day long is meet the most incredible people across this country, you end up not being skeptical or even cynical, Ben. You end up being very optimistic and hopeful. And you realize that the work you're doing has such a great impact on so many different lives. this is a country where people don't wake up every morning putting on their red and blue uniforms by and large. And I think they're getting back to just basic common sense, essential freedoms, appreciation for essential freedoms and liberty and fairness. The left loves to talk about equity. We're talking about fairness. They don't want men and girls sports. They don't want plumbers and pipe fitters to pay the student loans of lawyers and doctors. They don't want being taxed and regulated unfairly. They want school choice and charter schools and educational freedom and opportunity scholarships. They really do want all of that. And they're saying their basic premise is that we can do better and get better. And I also think the biggest division in our country that doesn't get enough attention, which doesn't make me that hopeful, though, is the difference between people who live their lives mostly offline, like I choose to, and people who live their lives mostly online, which is a lot of people in this country. I think that's got to give at some point. People are just going to wake up one day and say, I need fresh air and a fresh perspective.
It's the kitchen table versus the kitchen tablet.
And I too am worried about misinformation. I'm worried about a president, Joe Biden, who is being fact-checked so continuously right now by CNN and the Washington Post. That's new. Their fact-checker has gone to sleep and fired or whatnot. They took a big hiatus. They're out of their hibernation and they're fact-checking him. They're saying literally today in the Washington Post, endless Pinocchios for the President of the United States going out there to the places like Union Station and New York, where he's actually welcome to the campaign trail, Maryland. None of these are swing states, where he is welcome and just lying to the American people. But I'm hopeful also, and I will tell you, I need to actually say this to you or else I'd be a hypocrite. I hope that you interviewing me today doesn't get you in trouble at home. I would say that if Bill Clinton were sitting here too, because it's charming for you it's very charming for you to think that your wife is being put upon because she's a pro-life woman. But I would like pro-life women like that or conservative women to not be so rough on other pro-life conservative women like me.
Well, I don't think she was being on you for.
Well, it's not nice for her to say she finds my husband and me disgusting and our entire marriage to be disgusting. I don't judge her marriage. I only pray for her health and for the beauty of your marriage and your life together and your two daughters. And so I think shows like that make people take leave of their senses sometimes. But, as somebody who was not to the manner born, I have a lot in common with everyday people. And I think that's why I have so much hopefulness for this country too. This country's success stories really are made in the most unlikely places and spaces. And the forgotten man, forgotten woman, having grown up with people exactly like that. My mother's the original forgotten woman, forgotten by her husband, forgotten by feminism, forgotten by upward economic mobility. She's just a wonderful person, of course. I think there's so many more stories like that in this country that we have a hard time seeing and uncovering. But no, I'm a person filled with mercy and forgiveness, and I don't hold grudges. But I think a little bit of perspective helps too. I was always treated very nicely on The View. It's hard to see that if you watch The View, but I know what the conversations were when the cameras weren't rolling. And I have to say at The View, it was actually the older generation always very nice to me off camera because they see in me, like them, somebody who had to fight against a lot of men in my industry and emerge, on the other side of that. So
is there something that you would, when you look back at the you that was there in the late 90s in those ATR meetings with the stale bagels and the bad
and Doug Domenech.
Is there something that you would go back and advise yourself at that stage if you could send a message back in time?
Wow, that's a great one. Yes, I would never not get on those prop planes to go figure out how it's playing in Peoria or what they're loving in Lubbock. The gift of my professional career, Ben, has been that I went to all 50 states at least once to actually do products, to actually suss it out and sit with the people and listen to them. There's such an essential wisdom of people. If we put them in charge of solving these problems, they would do it like that because they thought it through. They literally cannot afford to make bad mistakes with some of their consumer purchases and some of their life decisions. What I would tell my younger self is to not let other people define you or make you feel badly. Mm-hmm. I like to say that nobody can make you feel badly without your permission, so don't grant it. And I say that to a lot of young men, but particularly women. But I think what I would say to myself then is, in Washington, D.C. particularly, get out there and go talk to people everywhere they live. Flyover country, unfortunately, is a real thing to many people. They don't really they don't necessarily understand the way a lot of people think and live. There's a lot of judgment out there and not a lot of grace. The last thing I would say to younger Kellyanne in those meetings, and I would say at those meetings with the Stale Bagels and ATR and Grover's an old friend and mentor of mine, we danced at each other's weddings. I would say this, Ben, if you're young particularly, learn to accept and understand the word no more than you say it. You will be rejected. You will be passed over. Your heart will be broken. You won't get that job or that position in college or graduate school, that seat that you thought you really deserved, that you can taste, that you had strived for and earned. But don't say the word no so much. Be available. Be accessible. Raise your hand and help out. When the boss says, whether it's in an internship or your first paying job, when they say, hey, can you stay late tonight? We have a crisis. Can you work this weekend? I said, well, I was going to work out. Tonight's my favorite show, or I've got it. My friend's having a bachelor party. Don't say any of that. Say, yes, I can. Chances are the crisis is averted. The need passes, and you get the credit as somebody who's available and accessible and cheerful. And I'll pass along the advice too to a younger me that I got from someone, which is, if you can't be good at it that day, at least be pleasant about it. People love to work with people who aren't gossipy and sniping about other people. They love to work with people who are pleasant and prompt. I'm not always prompt, but I am pleasant, and cheerful and optimistic. But it's a great message to our politicians too. Stop with the scolding us and lecturing us and the sour, dour gloom and doom. We want to be lifted up. We want people who are ready to solve problems, ready to build consensus when necessary, and ready to fight for those principles, of course, when essential. That's what I would really say. But I would also tell people today, show up at those meetings. You cannot live your life on Zoom. You can't just work from home for the rest of your life. And by the way, Kamala Harris, work from home does not apply to the Vice President of the United States.
Okay, really, we could be done, but can you say one nice thing about Kamala Harris? We've been pretty hard.
One nice thing about Kamala Harris.
I know I can say one nice thing if you need a minute.
One nice thing about Kamala Harris is that she has nice pantsuits.
When they're not brown and fading into the background like that one. My nice thing is I will defend Kamala's use of wired headphones as opposed to Bluetooth. She got some crap for that.
I don't disagree with her there. Those things always fall out of my ears.
They always fall out.
They're too expensive. They always fall out. And they're meant to be lost, by the way.
Yes, that's
George pointed that out to me early on. He said these are designed to be lost. The kids, we have 4 kids. That's 8 earbuds that you could be losing at any time. And when I went to get them again for Christmas last year, Santa, he said, those are just designed to be lost. Okay, I'll give that. That's a nice thing I said about George and Kamala. How's that? All at once.